The media were assembled at Croydon Crown Court, waiting to hear the words of one man. 4 months earlier, footballer Eric Cantona had kicked an abusive spectator in the chest whilst playing for Manchester United. Cantona had already been banned from playing the game for the rest of the season. Within the courtroom, he'd just learned his criminal sentence. Spared 2 weeks in prison, he would instead spend 120 hours in community service, teaching football skills to Manchester youngsters. Now a huge crowd of reporters wanted to hear what he had to say. Cantona offered them only one thing. When seagulls follow the trawlers, it is because they think sardines will be thrown into the sea. With that, he stood up and walked back out of the press conference. One reporter there at the time reflected on this extraordinary turn of events. Sardines? Trawlers? The media circus was stunned. Some roared with laughter, others giggled uncertainly. Were we the seagulls? Was he a sardine? What could he mean? Perhaps many who heard Jesus would have responded to his teaching with similar bemusement. Why? Because like Eric Cantona, even when he was wanting to make a serious point, Jesus would often choose to speak of things his listeners were familiar with. In his case, not seagulls and trawlers, but sheep and seeds and coins. Like Eric Cantona, Jesus seemed to prefer this form of communication when he knew the crowd would be mixed, including not only his friends, but those who were there to criticise whatever he said. And like Eric Cantona, people would come away from Jesus' teaching at one level understanding what they'd heard, but at another wondering if they'd grasped the entire point. This term in CU impact groups, we're going to be looking at this form of teaching employed by Jesus. Parables. Why would Jesus so commonly choose to teach in this way? This is precisely the question the disciples asked Jesus in verse 10 of today's passage. Why do you speak to the people in parables? His answer is shocking. We expect Jesus to say, I teach people in parables because they're a great way of revealing deep truth. We have good reason to expect this answer. The word parable literally means to throw alongside. So parables are stories thrown alongside abstract ideas to illustrate them in more familiar terms. At one level then, parables are earthly stories illustrating profound spiritual realities. In fact, it's this dynamic which makes Jesus' parables the most cherished of all his teaching, even amongst those who aren't his followers. Those who don't know much about Jesus will often concede, for example, that there's no better picture of love for a neighbour than the parable of the Good Samaritan. We recognise in Jesus' parables beautiful pictures of deep realities. It seems obvious that his parables reveal truth. But that's not the whole story. And it's not what Jesus says about parables here. Jesus emphasises that his parables will do different things in different people. Some, he says in verse 11, will get in on their secret, but others don't. In a sense, this second group see, but they don't see. They hear, but they don't hear. The point is that parables have a code that's built into them, a key that makes sense of them. Without the key, you're just left locked out and confused, like the journalist wondering if he was a seagull. But as soon as you have the key, the code opens. What was once a simple story becomes a profound and life-changing lesson. So how do you get the key to Jesus' parables? The clue comes in verse 10. You have to draw near to him and ask him, and listen to what he has to say. Jesus willingly shares the secret, the code, with all who ask. But there's a sifting process. You will only ask Jesus for the code if you're already somehow drawn by God to what he's offering. And that is the very point of the parable of the sower. God's kingdom is coming, but against all of the expectations of the day, it's not all coming at once, like a military power sweeping to victory. Instead, God's kingdom will grow as people listen to Jesus. And that'll be patchy. Some will fail to take Jesus' word to heart at all. It'll just be in one ear and out the other. Others will be changed by Jesus' word, but it will never sink deep enough to see them through times of trouble or persecution. Still, others will never truly have their hearts won by Jesus, so their heads will be turned by worries or wealth. But for those who do have ears to hear, they will be eternally transformed. For them, supernaturally abundant fruitfulness and life in Jesus' kingdom are theirs forever. The same sun that hardens the clay also melts the wax. As Jesus teaches in parables then, he is using metaphors and stories that even a child can understand. But he does so in such a way that their deeper meaning remains unclear to those who aren't committed enough to listen in, to discover the code, to find the key. So as we look at Jesus' parables in CU impact groups this term, what might we expect? We'll discover stories that on the face of it seem harmless enough, and maybe to some of us that's all they'll remain. Jesus will remain just a teller of stories. But for those of us who are willing to listen in, to discover the code to the parables and humbly respond to all we've heard, we'll discover impact. The impact of belonging to and growing in Jesus' kingdom. Impact that starts with us but can touch those around us. And so that means that all of us need to hear Jesus' sober invitation, issued in verse 9. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear.